you've watched much broadcast golf coverage lately, you've probably noticed a trend. Networks are increasingly using these tight cinematic angles with a shallow depth of field for walk and talks or greenside player reactions, but the second the ball's in the air, they immediately cut back to their traditional broadcast cameras. Why? Because these cameras have a much deeper depth of field, making it infinitely easier to track the ball and follow the action. I've filmed countless rounds of golf, from the collegiate and professional levels down to high school and juniors. My trusty workhorse has always been a camcorder, but I wanted to put the mirrorless cinema camera trend to the test. So during my daughter's high school tournament in Victoria, Texas, I decided to shoot round one with my Sony FX30 and my newly acquired Sony 70-200mm f2.8 OSS Mark II, a lens generally considered the standard for sports videography. For round two, I switched back to my go-to camcorder, the Panasonic HCX1500. I chose the FX30 specifically because it has an APS-C sensor. That 1.5 crop factor gives that 70-200 lens a bit more reach, turning it into roughly a 105 to 300 millimeter equivalent. However, my Panasonic camcorder features a 24x optical power zoom. In 35 millimeter terms, that equates to a massive 600 millimeters of reach. I knew the FX30 was going to fall short on distance, but I wanted to see if the image quality from that larger sensor made up for it. The FX30 sensor is roughly 14 times larger than the small 1/2.5-inch sensor inside the Panasonic. I tried to keep the setups as consistent as possible. Both rigs were mounted on my Manfrotto X Pro video fluid head monopod. Both utilized my newer F700 monitor, which, by the way, is just an excellent affordable monitor for sports videography. It goes up to 2,000 nits of brightness. The conditions were typical for Texas. Extremely windy with gusts up to 35 miles an hour, even up to 35 or 40 at times. The sun hood on my monitor essentially became a sail, making stabilization a real fight at times. I shot everything in 4K at 60 frames per second. I kept the shutter speed high around 1/250 to prevent motion blur on the golf ball, which is crucial if you want to add shot tracers later. On the FX30, I shot in S-Log3 using sgamut3.cine color space. For most of the first day, I kept the aperture wide open at f2.8 to maximize that cinematic feel. Though looking back, stepping down to f4 probably would have been the smarter play for tracking the ball. Out on the course, the functional differences between these two setups became obvious immediately. The camcorder is built for this. It has built-in ND filters, a deep focus plane, and a power zoom rocker. I have a remote that attaches directly into the video head handle, allowing me to zoom and record with one hand, leaving my other hand completely free to stabilize the monopod. The FX30 workflow was a completely different story. The lens requires manual zoom, meaning one hand was constantly on the zoom ring while the other wrestled with the monopod. Add in the shallow depth of field, making autofocus hunt, and the constant need to manually adjust the ND filter as the light changed, the workload was intense. Pace of play was typically rough as it is in high school. Rounds took nearly 7 hours. After just 3 hours with the FX30 rig, I was completely exhausted. By contrast, I filmed a full 18 holes over 7 hours with the camcorder on day 2 and felt fine. The fatigue factor of running a cinema rig solo outside the ropes cannot be overstated. Now let's look at the footage. There's no question that the image quality, color richness, and dynamic range coming out of the FX30 is superior. To get the camcorder even come close to the vibrancy of the Sony, I really had to crank the saturation in post, which then required tweaking the hue versus saturation curves to keep the reds from completely blowing out. The FX30 footage, on the other hand, barely needed a grade. I just applied a transform LUT and it was practically finished. But when it comes to capturing the actual sport of golf, image quality doesn't matter if you can't see the shot. With the FX30, anything beyond 70 or 80 yards gets pretty wide. You simply can't get tight on a player's tee shot and follow the ball to a landing zone 250 yards away. With the Panasonic, I could easily punch into its 600 millimeter equivalent, grab the landing, and use the power zoom to smoothly pull back. For tracking the ball and capturing the story of the hole, the camcorder is unmatched. Battery life was another major dividing line. The standard battery on the Panasonic lasted over 5 hours. That's just the tiny little battery it comes with. I swapped it for a second battery and finished the 7-hour day with about 80% left on that second battery. For the FX30, I used a V-mount battery to power both the camera and the monitor via dummy battery, but After just 3 hours, I was down to 9%. It wasn't a perfectly fair fight since the monitor was drawing from the V mount, but relying on massive batteries just adds to the size, weight, and travel complexity of the mirrorless setup. I do think cinema cameras have a place on the golf course. Using a 35mm prime on the FX30 or putting out my full-frame FX2 with an 85mm prime resulted in absolutely beautiful cinematic B-roll, swing videos. It's fantastic for greenside reactions, social media cutaways, and grabbing high-quality 33-megapixel still photos. But once the ball is in play, you need a different tool. If you wanted to make a mirrorless camera work for a full round, you would probably need a lens like the Sony 200 to 600mm. But carrying around a bazooka lens like that for 7 hours is just not practical. A 2x teleconverter might be something that I'll look at, but you lose light and image quality. My conclusion, if you're a solo operator filming competitive golf from outside the ropes, stick with a camcorder. Camera snobs might look down their nose at you for the small sensor, but the all-in-one portability, the power zoom, and battery life are exactly what the job needs. I am, however, looking at a higher-end broadcast camera to bridge that gap. The newly announced Sony NX800 and Z200 feature a 1-inch sensor, which is massively larger than my Panasonic's. Well, they also retain the built-in NDs and the power zoom. They also share Sony's color science, meaning they would match perfectly with my FX30 for a multi-camera shoot. I think I'll probably try and rent an NX800 soon or the Z200, and I'll try to let you know how it performs. I think I'll also try out a 2.0 teleconverter and see how that does with the 70-200 lens on my FX30. If you have experience shooting mobile sports with long telephoto lenses, drop a comment below. I'm always open to learning. And if you create golf content for YouTube, stick around for this quick tip. You can save hours of editing time using our custom golf Scorebug plugins for Final Cut Pro. They're incredibly easy to use and available right now on FX30. Check the description for a link and use the promo code NTM20 for 20% off of your purchase. Hit that like button, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you on the next tee.